And this evening we've got with us, we've got Dave, and we've also got Peter. So we're hoping it's going to be a little bit more interactive. While everyone's got the microphones on mute, as we know with Dave, if anyone wants to chip in at any point, you're welcome to do so. Please do use the comments bit, and we'll have a look at those at the end. And I can't see anyone else waiting, so we'll hand over to Dave to begin. But first, as usual, we've got our appeal page. If anyone wishes to make a donation either to help Sinalda's appeal, which is still going great guns, or to help with the museum, anything donated is really appreciated. And one of our recent acquisitions, which came in just this week, we've managed to acquire, using some of the donated money, a postcard showing Sir Aubrey Bockelblanc in very crisp outside the station at Ravenglass. So all those donations do help develop the collection and help the museum go a bit further. So I'm going to hand over to Dave now, who's going to take over driving, and sit back and enjoy. It's not just about River and River Mike tonight.
Okay. The first problem that we found when we started pulling this together was we assumed we were going to be doing the standard, a paragraph for the scooters, because they seem to be just playthings that everyone had a go with. And it turns out that it was more complicated than that, unsurprisingly for the Ratty. This has been variously named the Wall Auto Wheel and a Douglas, but we're actually fairly sure that, all right, we're fairly sure that this is what's called an economic engine.
Actually, can I query?
Yeah,
it is a Wall Auto Wheel.
Right. Are you sure?
Because we had one in a garage across the way.
Well, that's what we need.
Yeah.
This is why we're trying to turn this presentation round a bit.
Right. Sorry to butt in.
No, please do. And these machines didn't have a gearbox, according to the
You pushed and started the bike. There were thousands apparently made.
Yes, yeah.
As bike conversion.
Well, all three of them, the auto wheel, the economic was built for pumping water out of World War trenches, which again is probably why there were quite a few available after the war. And the Douglas motorcycles were built for the forces during the war, and they reckon they built 70,000 of them, which again is probably why there were spare ones to play with. The key, we start to try and find differences between whichever scooter this is. Because this one, the petrol tank is mounted on U-shaped clips. And in this one, they definitely are inside the side panel. So that's the same one again. As I say, we're very limited on pictures and descriptions. This is a different one. It's not the same one because the petrol tank straps go right down the side, so it's moved across. And also, have you seen the trailer behind it? Because there are 6 wheels on this scooter, and there's potentially a gear lever there. And I say that this one definitely doesn't have a a gear lever. And the relevance on this one was that in 1917, in March, the railway offered to carry the mails to boot for £25. Their original, fairly optimistic offer back in 1915 for £75 was turned down. The offer was accepted in 1917, and the first condition on the offer was that, quote, that the service will be extended to boot for the conveyance of mails for that village. Then just 2 years later, that one started in October 17. 2 years later, a post office surveyor actually said, quote, this service has since been maintained by using passenger trains between Ravenglass and Beckford Station and a light engine between the latter station and Boot. So this might well explain why we have so few pictures of a train at Boot. The obvious one was Muriel with the Hayward train, but that was also definitely posed. But there are very few others with trains. There's the occasional engine in one coach, engine in two coach, but no trains, no passengers as far as we can see. Then I've jumped ahead of myself. I'll go back one. In 1919, the narrow gauge railway sent a letter to the post office saying the railway will shut down from October 1919 to June 1920. Then in further letters, they came up with a solution, and Robert Proctor Mitchell actually put forward and we quote, we've carried out certain experiments with a petrol motor engine and have 2 more being built to pull trains on this line. One will be available in a few weeks' time, and we're prepared to continue carrying mails to and from Beckfoot, providing the subsidy is increased to £130 a year. Now, before Peter interjected just now, I thought the wall auto wheel we didn't have photos of, and these photos I thought were the economic scooter, but it's open to debate. It's an ongoing process. Now, the interesting thing is we were saying this is another one of those scooters, maybe the same one, maybe a different one. But if we zoom in on it, there's a gear lever just to the right of the engine. So either we were told the economic didn't need gears, so maybe someone's experimented with that, or something, like I say.
Is it a gear lever? Because otherwise, how did it have brakes? It's one of the things I'm studying. It is a wall water wheel tank.
Right.
And it looks like when you get into it, the wall water auto wheel motorbike engine.
Right.
They're quite distinctive.
The only thing that puts a fly in your ointment is...
Yeah, these are the 1923.
Yeah, 21. And it does say, and looking at the shape of it, an economic 2-stroke motor at the top. And then we move on to the Douglas, which again, we thought was individual Douglas, but our current theory is there are at least 2 of them. The other slightly intriguing, but difficult to make out part about the bottom shot is second from the left is Proctor Mitchell. Third from the left with his bowler hat on is Couchy. And it's only one of 2 photos we have of him. and we think the driver's the engineer.
One of the Johnson
One of the
brothers.
Johnsons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I never found out the Christian names. I must.
One of them was
Rob.
William, and
Yeah.
because it was Billy, the same as
Right.
Bassett Loke guy, and I can't remember the other one, but one of them was definitely William. Yeah, so this is a Douglas, and it's a pretty spectacular machine because it runs from Ravenglass to Wastwater, if you look at the caption below. So was it a road rail? We don't know. One of the key things to spot on this is coming out to the petrol tank, the feed coils before it goes down to the engine. And also you've got a lump of possibly a sandbox on the front.
Well,
it could be.
You'd expect something like that. I mean, I think the coil thing is a flexible to stop, to allow some movement.
Yeah.
Rather than being just a straight right angle.
Yeah. Well, to sort of encourage my theory that there were more than one, this one still has the coil, and it now has this fairing on, which means that we can't see the detail quite so obviously. And that's just from the other side. But, the Douglas machines were definitely a different shape. Drivers to the front axle, you can see the drive wheel on that one quite nicely. And the glass coach was obviously very handy for them. Going back to that one, people thought that the scooter was taking on quite a heavy load in that case. But if you look carefully behind Commandant Croft, who's standing beside, and look further into the background, there's a train going the other way. So we think the most it would have had would have been the glass coach and a little Hayward wagon. The Hayward sleeping car is beginning to look in a bit of a state. I'm not sure I'd want to spend my evenings in that. It probably matches Skid Row, do you reckon?
Well, it went again though.
Oh yes, I mean
they restored it in.
They restored it, and then
couple of years.
It started rotting again. Now, this is still a Douglas, but it just seems to have such a different shape to it. There isn't that coil on the feed, and the arrangement at the front is different. We think it's a Dawson that they've turned into a saloon, if you could call it a saloon. And that is definitely William Johnson driving it.
So it's not Joe Stockton.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, if you actually think of how many gestations the surviving scooter went through, I'd actually put money on them being relatively singular number of chassis. Not one, but you know what I mean? Not many chassis and lots of tinkering on top.
There certainly seem to be, because bits get bolted on to extend backwards.
Yeah.
But I'm beginning to think that there were two.
Yeah, I mean, it's all good.
But on the road, what would the lifespan be of a motorcycle engine of that vintage? Was it?
I mean, there are people now keeping those auto wheels going.
Yeah.
They're real collectible pieces.
So they weren't sort of
So
seen as disposable.
I don't think they'd be worked to death.
Yeah.
Because I mean, let's face it, the lads running them, they had their motorbikes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was, you put your clogs on the belt
Yeah.
when you needed to go up the hill. If you had one of the older versions or something.
Yeah, so, whereas we would have disposed of that in 5 minutes, we're still doing scooters. This time we've moved forward to May 1927. And this is the only picture we have of the Scott Squirrel scooter, again taken by Mary Fair. And again, don't you wish she'd zoomed out a little bit, because I really would like to know what those huge bulks of timber are behind. But behind you've got the high level siding and the weighbridge. But as I say, that's the only picture we've found of the Scott.
Apart from a hole in the shed door, isn't it?
Yes.
Theory.
I was just about to say
Oh,
that.
sorry.
Well, no, I was going to ask you if it was the same one. The story was that it was coming back into Ravenglass, allegedly at some speed, and the points were set wrong, so it was set to the engine shed. And just before impact, the driver jumped off, and this thing hit the engine shed, severely damaged the doors, and pushed out back 2 feet, which is quite an achievement.
You'd have said so. Yeah. Very so.
Okay, moving on. The only thing we can claim to have built on this one is the cab, but we're now fairly convinced that it arrived in October 1923, and they very quickly put the cab on, because by the time it was towing Esk in December 23, the cab was there. And the only other modification they did was they must have suffered with winds, because there were 3 straps installed from effectively the radiator cap back to hold it on.
For the uninitiated, Dave, what is it?
It's the Model T Ford.
Right, okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Or a convertible Model T Ford.
Yes. At the time, it was theoretically possible to convert it to a road vehicle. It had what was described as its own turning plate, in order that it could go forwards most of the time. They were developed as 2-foot ones during the First War, and there the turning plate wouldn't have been so significant, because if you've got a platoon of soldiers, they can each hold a bit and you can spin it round. But the pictures we have of 3 or 4 people trying to keep it balanced and spinning round and levering it with a bit of rail look a bit hairy. It's the guard is Jim Lowther, just standing beside the machine, and the gentleman to the right of him is Mr. Greenlee. So we have a little sequence of 3 of him. So then it means that I won't labour on too much about the conversion of Muriel to River Oat. This is a brilliant Whitworth photo from 1925. And the first thing you probably notice is the result of the head-on collision with Colossus. The front buffer beam was slightly damaged. Colossus was written off basically for 15 months. Apparently, and Peter will correct me on this, is this a lubricator?
Yeah, I would say.
The tiny box below the nameplate, and just to the right.
It's an add-on, isn't it?
It was definitely added on at some stage. But I picked that shot because when they sorted out it, they basically added a bit on the back for the carrying wheels. And this one's quite good in that most other things are similar, but you can see the arrangement where the rear carrying wheels were added. That's it fairly soon afterwards. And this is the official first day of operation, which was 1st of August 1928. And you've actually got Ted Wright doing the driving, the big I am. He did do a fair bit of driving, and we know a little bit about this. This is just below Hurton Road and is obviously posed. Mary Fair, although she took pictures in late July of the first actual run with passengers with River Ert, this was official, and Will Whitworth gives us a great story about how he was asked to take some photos, and they then found there wasn't a single seat left on the train. So if you look carefully at the back of the tender, you'll see a light coloured board, and he describes how he was in his light grey flannels and was sitting on the back of the tender on a board. And the flannels didn't remain light grey. Then a little bit later on, if I just go back, the original lubricator on the running board is from the Muriel days, but they haven't yet replaced the screw reverser with a reversing lever, which they have in this one. The lubricator's gone inside the cab, and the reversing lever you can just see at the back of the running board. So that takes it probably into the 30s, early 30s, 33, 34. Then jumping forward a bit, because basically it went and they didn't have to do very much to it apart from the odd overhaul. So this is now post-war, and we know it's post-war because on the right there you can actually see the foundations for the toilet block. Excuse me. So this is 49, possibly going into 1950. And the only major change in terms of appearance is the sandboxes have now been added. And then it carried on, chuntering on. Some people thought, and Douglas sort of decided, that it needed something to lift it, because it's always looked a little bit like a swan, sort of very low in the water and paddling furiously, but gliding along nonetheless. So he took one of Mary Fair's prints, and he drew all over it in ink to give him the concept of the higher cab, the higher dome, the higher chimney. So he's not my favourite person for drawing on proper archive prints, but this was how it first turned out, and Peter might well be able to tell me that dome changed shape, didn't it? It became taller.
That dome was made for that engine conversion then.
Right.
And we nicked it, and because it's got Hayward in it, it became extended, and it's the dome that's now on Katie. So that's a genuine original Hayward dome by default.
By default, yeah, that'll do. Goes.
But it's got its old tender behind it. Really, I thought it really looked sweet with that old tender.
And then this was 1994. It's centenary, with Happy George keeping an eye on things. We'd have quite a few pictures of him smiling on this one.
Well, he was dressed up for the occasion.
Oh, he was, yes.
Entered into the spirit. Absolutely.
And he definitely smiled. The tender has flares on the top, which I'm still not quite sure why we took the flares off. Was it health and safety?
Well, no, the guards had difficulties at the back coupling, and for some reason, extending the coupling physically, like it was done on Northern Rock, was too difficult.
All right.
So they took the flares off, they welded everything off, and I'll tell you what was a lot easier, extending the coupling, tidying it up afterwards.
Mm. And as Trevor will remember, the reason the engine is where it is now is for the golden spike to be driven in by Sir Peter Hayward, just about where the blue cone is now. I presume if it was golden, it didn't stay there.
The gold paint did very well. I think it survived the first impact.
And then jumping forward, and a nice bit of Hayward with a coach in between. This was at Beamish in 2019, I think. Yeah, quite nice. So then we thought we'd move on to River Mite. It was quite a spectacular engine. We're so grateful to Will Whitworth again, because this is the only under construction photo we have. And again, it's quite crisp and sharp, so you can make out the details. Now, there are two stories which sort of contradict each other. Both of them come from Tom Jones. And he said originally that the inherent fault with River Mite 1, because it was very powerful and actually quite smooth, was that they used the wrong chassis at the back. They'd planned to put the chassis from Colossus at the front and Sir Aubrey's chassis at the back to take the load and the impact. And he says they were called away on other jobs, they came back to it, they fitted the pivot and they fitted it to the wrong chassis. And he quite frequently says he thinks that was its demise. So it was built and it was lined out, and it's certainly intriguing. Lots of pictures of people looking puzzled, looking at it. And just as an aside, I've seen 4 or 5 comments in publications that say, yes, it was very dramatic, but oh, those rivets, they're bolts. So I don't understand the quotes, but at least 2 people said it, and then someone else read it and just repeated it. Now this is a little bit more controversy here, although it's almost certainly taken on Will Whitworth's camera. It's been quoted that the gentleman in the cab is C.J. Allen, and we've looked at photos of the 2 of them contemporary with this time, and it's definitely not C.J. Allen. And then we found a letter from a gentleman in the Midlands to George Barlow, and he was describing buying cards from Will Whitworth because they were sold and swapped at the time considerably around the country. Obviously, as we even know now, the 15-inch is a small collection of people, and they do bump into each other in different places. So our theory is, because of the letter to George Barlow, that this is the only photo we have of Will Whitworth, which is really nice because I have him as a hero parallel to Mary Fair He took some really nice pictures. And the machine in action, both of Might and Esk, when they were articulated, had serious problems with the flexible steam pipes from front to back engine. And we don't even think it's raining. We think the umbrella in the second coach is against the steam rather than the rain. For the rest of it, very little's changed. Nice picture by Mary. Incidentally, we have a postcard that she sent to Harry and, what was Harry's wife's name? Harry Hilton.
Florrie.
Yeah, Harry and
Florence.
Florrie, who were obviously off for a week, having a holiday. And she writes on the back, "Are you going to be back in time for Thursday for this excursion?" Because she'd written on it, the Morecambe excursion. And she signs it, "Love, Auntie," but we know the writing, it's Mary's. Then this is sort of, as Might was tailing off. This is 1936. It's a picture by Harry Buck. And the demise of Might over this period seems to coincide with the conversion of NG39 to the passenger tractor, because that was done over the winter 1935 into 36. So we think there was a sort of crossing as one became less popular and the other more so and easier to operate. And this is how it ended up. This is a Robin Buttrell one from 1945. The chassis have gone and have now achieved mythical status. They may have been cut up, they may have been sold. We don't know.
Well, I don't know. The man from the Titanic Steamship Company did admit to cutting them up.
Oh,
or
right.
having them scrapped.
Oh.
Come on then. The JCB, Bamford.
Oh, Bamford.
Mark Bamford. There was a letter somewhere.
Is there?
Oh,
I've not seen that one.
Oh, well, I think I
Right.
got it somewhere. We did try to get a categoric out of him, because, as you say, mythical.
Yes. So we may have a solution to the myth. It may well have been cut up. So any bits that are around that are claiming to be from there probably aren't. So then we move on to the two ICLs. And this was the Felldale show in 1925, just after the Ford Model T had expired spectacularly. So they decided to build another internal combustion loco. They had hoped to use it for the Felldale show, where every bit of traction was useful. And they got it as far as Delgarth, but they hadn't fixed
the diff. It had got a differential
differential.
in it, hadn't it?
So it was spinning and
The
not
two wheels
working.
nailed on either end could do what they liked.
Yes, which they probably did. And the engine, although it was later another Ford, this one is actually another Douglas, but this time a 9 horsepower Douglas that powered searchlights, if memory serves. And even after they got the body on, they'd left the Douglas in that position so that when they brought the Ford in, it would all line up. So you can see it slung under, sort of level with the front bogie. And now they've put the Ford engine in, given it some flashy headlights, and it's looking quite good, we think. This is a slightly wider shot than the one that's usually published. It's much easier in this one to realise that it's earth there. There are details, but it's probably not worth going into them too much. I just like this as a picture, bearing in mind that most people of a certain age will remember Dick Long. This is 1927, and you have Dick Long and the guard, Jim Lowther, just pushing it around. And Stuart was pointing out earlier that if you stood in the same position, you could take an almost identical shot, except there are 3 lots of rails instead of 2.
And what a brilliant piece of wall that was.
Yes.
Because the cast concrete top survived
When
the cow catcher.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, the snowplow.
it was the snowplow,
It was
yeah.
the snowplow being punched through it.
I mean, we have 2 pictures of
What,
it.
of the
but,
snowplow? Right.
No, of the hole.
Of the hole.
There's a picture from the road,
Yeah.
looking through the hole to.
Yeah.
But I thought, trying to think who. Oh, it was Jeff Bennett. Took 2 brilliant pictures. So thank you, Jeff. But I haven't got them with me tonight. Through this inn, this is just above the quarry. You can see Beckford, Stanley Gill House just further up the line, and with no foliage around, it's always surprising how close the river is. And it's another merry fair, and being hardy Dales folk, she and her companion were travelling up in the little Hayward flat with seats, because that's definitely her companion still sitting there. And the other little intriguing thing is, when we bought the glass coach, it had a corridor down the middle. And as you can see from the backs of the seats there, they now go all the way across. So how did people get in and out?
I think they were very flexible in those days.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how did they get in and out of the quarry wagon? It might only have happened once, but you try getting in and out of a quarry wagon.
Now, who was it? Harry Hilton had a pair of steps.
Yeah.
And he went up the
platform
with a pair of steps.
Yeah.
Then it unfortunately collided head-on with ICL number 2. And when they rebuilt it into a shape that almost everyone will recognise now, even though this is still back in the 30s, from Hollinghouse Bridge, with some rather nice hen coops in the field, and the barn is Fisher Ground behind. James gave us this shot, which is, it's not spectacularly different, but it's taken from a very different viewpoint. I don't think we've got anything like it. And on the very left, you can see the big oil tank that they cut a hole in the end and used it as a shed. And then the wooden extension to the engine shed, it shows quite nicely on that. And obviously the standard gauge and the loop in there. Then we jump forward to January 1999, when the engine was having been taken out earlier to use as a crew van, was put back in again, and it finally ran again under its own steam. An intrepid group.
All credit to the Nottingham University students and Owen Ryder, Tilligans.
Oh, right.
They persevered. They made a frame to replace what would have been the old 4T cut down.
Yeah.
And worked out, shortened the prop shaft that had It wasn't our prop shop, it was one acquired.
Hmm.
It was all engineering backwards. There's a hole here. What the earth did it do? And this was the one occasion when it ran around.
Yes. Yeah, and I think we only have photos of it because Bob Tebb actually ran alongside taking photos. So we
But
have
what it
5 or
revealed was
6.
how on earth you drove it and saw anything out of it.
Yeah.
If you were as small as generally people were when they did it at that stage, you'd hardly see out of the top. You couldn't maneuver your feet onto the pedals and look out.
It does, yeah.
You know, sit in it when you get the opportunity and try and visualize it operating as a locomotive.
Yeah, I've often
a
thought,
useful
looking
one.
at the small window in the front,
Yeah.
how did they see what was going on? Then we move on to ICL2, and before we move on to the actual event, this was a suggestion that was made before they went out looking at petrol locos. I know nothing about electric control except it says generator on the left, powered by a 6-cylinder 2-litre engine, and the actual motor on the right, driving through worm gear. So interesting, but in the end rejected. So they found themselves a 38 horsepower Lanchester touring car, and they basically chopped it up, took the vast majority of it out in one lump, and Walter Burney's looking a bit dubious, bearing in mind there are ropes that are carrying it and not chains, and his feet are underneath. It did look dubious. On the left there you can see Ella's dome sitting upside down, and if you look carefully, the spectacle plate is just behind it. So lots of nice corner views. And this is what they did to Ella's frames. They bolted on front and back enough frame to carry axles. And it's quite a nice shot because we hadn't seen one before at this stage. And they're just measuring up the bits of timber that would come between the engine and the chassis. And our spectacular cab from the Ford is sitting on the bank there. Lots of things seem to end up at the bank. It does seem to have been a favourite dumping ground. So then they basically plonked the engine down on the chassis. Still no driving wheels yet. And then they put the driving wheels in, and drive was by a fairly chunky chain to the left-hand side there. You can see it better on that view, which gives you the details. So the driving wheels are coupled by rods. You can see the carrying wheels at the back. And we can even see what the chain drive looked like, because that's a view inside the back, which is, again, is slightly unusual. Thank you, Mary. So it's big engineering in terms of miniature railways. And then if we zoom in a little bit closer, and this will be something that motorcycle enthusiasts will recognize, you have the seat at the top with the petrol tank directly below you. Not something that I would relish, but never mind. And the machine in action with a lovely set of Hayward and Hayward type coaches. And although they're wet weather coaches, a lot of people are hanging out from the balconies.
Said it's big engineering. You imagine where you're sat driving that one.
Yes.
Sat roughly about height level with one of the the granite wagons. So you're up in the air.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The whole thing is 6 foot, I don't know what, 6'6" high.
Yeah.
And you're just clearing the roof.
And it was definitely one side of the engine. So it was this side, as you can see on this view. If you look carefully, you'll see the driver is there, but he's tucked right into the side because the engine carried on beside him. Jim Lowther again is the guard. And although this looks like Rivermite, it's not actually. Tom said that after the collision with ICL-1, they tried to do bits and pieces to repair it, but didn't. It was one of those jobs they never really got round to. So the aforementioned oil tank is above the chimney, or behind the chimney, and I'm afraid that's the remains of ICL-2 dumped on the bank. Does that sound familiar?
Well, you're not going to show the bits of Murthwaite. You haven't got the photos of Murthwaite of the chassis, because the chassis was at Murthwaite at that same time.
Well, if you refer to James Waterfield's book,
exactly,
he has 2 lovely photos in there of Ellis frames at Murthwaite, and we'd always believed that the bent bits that we have in the museum were bent in the collision, but James found a lovely photo.
George Barlow.
It might have been a George.
George Barlow in the 1950s. That proved when it was still intact before it got taken apart for Sheila.
Well, at some stage at Murthwaite, presumably it was in the way again, so they were moving it. Yeah. But someone was a little heavy-handed, shall we say.
These things happen.
So yeah, it was quite nice to see the photo that proved to us that when it was first dumped at Murthwaite, everything on the frames was nice and square. And the bits we have are the original Ella bits. We don't have the bolt-on goodies. And I've used this one with Quarryman on the right and NG39, passenger tractor, Perkins, Pretender. It's got more names than most of our locals.
Skitterbeck, one that people don't talk about. That's the little stream that runs past the sewage works at Dalegarth Cottages. You can draw your own conclusions.
I wonder why we don't talk about it.
Well, we should use it on one of our engines. I think we were going to.
Well, yes, it is a beck of sorts.
Yeah.
So on the right is the original Muirhill chunky chassis, and we painted out the built in 27 because it was 26. And on the left, you can see again they put a bogie at the back. As I say, it's been through a number of engines, a number of forms, and finally, and just to wrap up because I've been rambling long enough, this is its current form, but still the same underneath. That chassis is quite impressive. And on that note, we'll hope to pick up at some time in the future a part 2, which would deal with particularly Northern Rock and Japanese engines. And we have someone in mind who might be able to help us with that. So we'll need to twist his arm. But that's it for now. Thank you.
So we'll see if anyone put any comments in, if I can remember how to do it. So let's have a look and see. There's 13 in the chat. So we'll go back through. So Matthew asked, is it on Hayward wheels and axle boxes?
That little roller, I presume. I wonder if it's to oil the bits that wobble backwards and forwards of the Hayward valve gear, because of all the things that would be awkward to get at and that wear out.
Yeah,
That might be the one thing you wanted not to wear out.
Yes. We'll throw that towards James if he's listening.
Yes. And then Mike Decker, we must be talking about the scooter.
Yeah.
The coil is probably to isolate the fuel tank from the engine vibration.
I would agree.
And by the way, I've lived in the back hills of South Dakota since 1977.
Oh, that's because we were referring to him in our conversation before we officially started. So, good evening, Mike.
And Ryan's picked up that Trevor was driving the scooter in the picture.
I wasn't going to say that.
And Mark Harrington has mentioned
yes,
rods down and whistle on the cab roof. So that must be one of the phases of River Earth.
Yeah, that was the first phase of River Earth. They moved the whistle, but didn't bother filling in the hole. So we have several pictures with the hole in the cap. So yeah, very much different shades of green. That would be the Earth with the old and new, with the old tender. And
it's only run like that for probably 3 months. I think we're about the July of that summer when it finally got the new tender, the one that we now know and love. But it did look nice. And the 6-wheeler, of course, carried on as the water tank wagon for emergency use. So nothing is wasted on the Ravenglass Eskdale Railway.
And
Ryan says better without the flares.
Well, he knows nothing. And Christopher says you can still see the golden spike. It's silver now.
Oh, that's great, Christopher. I'll go and take a photo of it.
And Matthew said, do you reckon they could have got it to work with 2 shorteners? So we must be talking about River Mites.
Yeah.
With 2 shortened
Well,
if
it had Katie's chassis under one end and Ella's chassis under the other end, it would be running still.
Yeah.
It would be indestructible.
There was that interesting picture that appeared on Facebook earlier this year with River Mites from the opposite side to where the normal pictures are. And you can see in the cab, it had one of the Hayward push button reverser levers, which appeared on one of the Facebook groups.
I can't remember whether
it's not one we have in the collection, but there was a picture of River Mite appeared earlier in this when people weren't able to go out and clearly scanning pictures at home. And it was taken from the opposite side, and you can see the cab. And it came about over a discussion about a regulator handle that has...
Oh, the mysterious regulator, yeah.
And in the picture, the make do amend is there because you can see the Hayward reverser in the corner, so which kind of is interesting. But we need to get the picture again to see a bit more detail and zoom in on it.
Yeah, I'd like that because I've got a couple of comparative shots inside the cab before the lubricator moved to the sort of left-hand side of the cab. But I don't remember seeing the reverser inside.
So that could have been Ella's reverser.
Yes, because Muriel's was in use.
Muriel's might have been in use at the time that Mike was.
And then Mike has commented showing the foot brake pedal on the Hayward coach.
That was the first ICL one at Delgarth Cottages, and I only know that, Mike, because James pointed it out to me, much to my embarrassment. We'd looked at that photo 100 times, and it was only when James said, "Oh, that's the brake," I thought, oh yeah, so it is, but just hadn't registered.
And Ross Duggan has mentioned somewhere there's a note that Tom Jones had further plans for Rivermite 1.
Well, there's that drawing in the files that somebody made up in about the late 50s to make an 082 using the Mike boiler on
Right.
the Pulteney chassis. And the way they did it in those days, just shove some wheels at the back.
That's more or less what.
Yeah. Well, there is a little bit of correspondence. Somebody in VR whose name escapes me at this minute did write to them and suggested at just about the time that Keswick were not necessarily going to be interested in spending more money.
All right. I can tell you, I think, what happened to Mike's boiler. It was sold to a nursery and they used it for heating greenhouses.
I can tell you, because in July 1969, my first job in the summer season was to go with Royal Anchor and a lifting frame and 2 gentlemen from Ulverston to Murthwaite. Lift this and put it on a wagon. The wagon was one of the long 4-wheelers that have been a coach. If you like a rambling story, I'll tell this to its end. Right. So we finally got it on. Oh, sorry, I got a note, because in those days you got a note,
an instruction,
set of instructions, a train order. And it said I got to get it on, and when I got it on and could go out, I had to tell the drivers going up when I was coming out, but I had to go out if there was a train coming down. So I had to follow one up to Urton Road, time to our suiting. And then I had to get it to Urton Road, but if it fell off, we were to try and roll it out of the way and not hold the trains up. I guess not. Anyway, we get it on this wagon in the back half of the siding at Murthwaite, and then we proceed. However, the horn guides on this wagon off coach are now below the rail top. So every time it meets some bits of old point work, it lurches around. And this is a boiler sat on wood on the right. It wobbles about a lot.
Yeah.
You will be amazed at how many bits of point work there were in the Murthwaite area that have been taken out, but left in, so to speak. And we discovered them all, including the one that I particularly remember was accelerating towards Murthwaite Halt and discovering the point that had been the east end of the Murthwaite siding, which I hadn't known about at all. So we hit that at a wobble.
Yes.
And then we got it to Urton Road, and the men unloaded it. As you say, it went off to Ulverston, and sadly, no more heard of it.
All right. So Ulverston, that's a step forward, because I didn't know where.
This wagon, forever after, was known as the Wawa wagon, because a certain man who looked after the wagons used to go, as George Staniforth said, well, that wagon's going to break an axle one day, because we bent the axle. It spent the next X years on permanent wage duty, waddling about with its bent axle. And as I say, it was known as the Wawa wagon. And it finally broke, I think, in the lead up to the 1981 cavalcade. But somebody could correct me on that. It just happened to choose a moment when it could have done it spectacularly in front of an audience.
Yes, that's the trouble with audiences nowadays. They've all got bloody cameras.
Sorry to digress.
No, that's what it's about.
But Tom didn't like it, and he cut the safety valve seats out. I mean, it was a perfectly good boiler that had done not many years, and you could have altered it, and it would have cost peanuts to do it. And basically, it had the thumbs down.
Hi guys, I put that comment on, Peter.
What?
I said I put that on as a comment.
All right.
Cyril had said to me, cut lumps out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, I presume it was for something like either the Mite or the Esk rebuild in 65 when it went to Gowers. There's something, it was for saving 2 bits of bronze.
Yeah, so that ties in.
Yeah.
Good, we can add it into the details. And thank you, Owen, for the names of the refurbishers.
Lovely, yes. Heroes, genuine heroes.
There is some video on YouTube, isn't there, on the museum?
What of it running?
Of it running, yes.
Yeah.
Because Bob might have mentioned he filmed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the museum's YouTube channel, there's, I think it's about 50 seconds of it sort of running across the bridge at.
I mean, the sad thing is, we have done a appraisal. Whether maybe I ought to alter it, I don't know. But I did try and calm Martin Cookman's fears that somebody might suggest we get it into working order again, because I don't think the big wheels that have the differential on, the fixed differential, the drive, would remotely fit any standard. You know, you either turn, well, I don't think you could turn them. Martin reckoned they were chilled iron and not capable of being turned to profile.
Would the bodywork survive moving?
The bodywork is in remarkable condition because it hasn't cracked any paint since it went into that museum.
No, considering it's
I mean,
drying out.
When we say considering, we know what considering is all about.
Yes, I'll keep those pictures to myself. Sorry. Right.
And Owen's mentioned the date of the mid-1990s.
Yes, good.
And Trevor's mentioned ICL did more mileage on P-Way than in traffic.
Yeah, it was used an awful lot. There are several pictures working when they dropped the bank at Millwood. It seemed to be heavily involved in moving wagons and things. So yeah, it's fairly good.
It was just a jest that, you know, it was kind of put back into traffic in inverted commas as an addition to the four-wheelers when they were covered over in 62.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we inherited it on the P-Way and used it quite extensively, sort of late 60s through the 70s into the 80s until the yellow van was built. So it would be whizzing up and down week in and week out for at least 5 months of the winter, because obviously we would be shut down for the winter.
Yeah.
So it would, you know, it was just a sort of a gag that it must have probably done more miles as the winter caboose than it probably did in traffic.
Yeah, and spent quite a lot of time at Delgarth as well with quarrymen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, brilliant.
Mind you, sorry, Margaret Todd's birthday, when she was 60. On Saturdays, Billy Bell used to go down and pick them up. Oh, sorry, no, Billy Bell used to go down every day and pick them up.
Every day.
And then when I first started, it was a job to do the first 9 o'clocks in the morning train that took the cafe staff up. Except on a Saturday, the trains ran later. And we didn't have a 9 o'clock from Ravenglass, it was 11 o'clock. So I had to go down to Eskdale Green and pick them up and bring them to Delgarth. And on Margaret's 60th birthday, I decorated it with little 60s stuck on and took quarrymen down.
I'm not sure how that would have gone down, actually.
Not quite the proverbial.
Yeah, we have a nice picture of Margaret and Anne and a third one that Trevor
Mary Todd.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Mrs. Greer.
Clear, yeah.
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 And
The thing about going down with there's a shot of that in the film that Alan Garrett did, 64 to 67 film that he did. There's a shot of going down with Quarryman to pick Margaret, Mary, and such like up in that period, but that was still going on as late. I can recall it certainly in 1978, going down with Sheila from Dalegarth Cottages with my daughter Angela when she was 2 years old on a couple of mornings. You know, it was a bit of a novelty of a ride out because obviously you had the 4 seats, so there was probably only 2 or 3 people to pick up, so you just squeezed them into the Sheila sort of thing. Save propelling carriages and such like. So that would still be going on, you know, another ICL story sort of thing will be going on until the late 70s.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Trevor, again.
The Glencoe correspondent.
Trust the Glencoe correspondent to come up with. We'll have to say it because I presume they can't see the.
Oh, what a shame you can't see the screen at this.
Yeah, no, everyone can see the comments if they're looking.
Oh, that's
so
all right,
they will see the comments about a trustee of the museum's feet appearing on YouTube.
And I have to say, with your comments about the Alan Garrett film, that embarrassingly, because I haven't got through the stills yet, I haven't even started looking at the videos. So I really ought to revisit those.
I think it's actually a brilliant piece of reportage. We took our piss out of it with Douglas disappearing behind the shop with shorts on, or sorry, with long trousers and coming out with shorts. You know, and continuity errors that you might jest about. But actually, when you look at it now, it's absolutely a pearler of day in the
priceless. It's absolutely priceless.
Absolutely.
Giving you a view of the railway at a time when the new company had just started, but practices and customs hadn't changed that much from the old days, if you will. But it was all the characters and people that were there at the time that have obviously gone now. And it was a snapshot, you know, like I've always said, by the time you got into 1976, when we had the loops and the radios and everything, that's when the railway changed. So it was a serious snapshot in time of that period, well before that change took place.
Yeah, one shot I do remember from it was following Graham after he'd had his breakfast. He actually went out of the front door at Fisherground, and Gwynnie Steele was standing just out of shot. Now that must have been the first time the front door had ever been used, because everyone used the back.
Yeah,
but it was really nice to see a little shot of Gwynnie.
Yeah, just shot straight back in again. Yeah.
We maybe ought to at least.
Oh,
posh wellies and ordinary wellies.
And yard wellies. Sorry. So we may well, if we can get the expertise up a bit to do edits, to pick out bits and pieces from movies, we might well try and do that as a future talk. I'm not promising too much because my editing isn't brilliant, but it would be a good comparison to run through, and it would make a good talk, I think.
Yes.
Right. Somebody remembered?
Yes.
Is that it?
I think that's it.
Oh,
yes.
Well, that's brilliant, because that is more. I know the three of us have chatted quite a bit, but we were trying to recreate what we were doing in the archive with the original meetings, which was a much less structured, smaller presentation. And inevitably, because people chipped in, we learned more through the evening. So this is much more like it.
Yes,
I think it's-
your pen's been out taking notes since the last 10, 15 minutes.
Oh yes, yeah. So we've got lots of details to add. There's always something to add, and the depressing thing is on the record, when you notice a small change in a locomotive, you then have to go back. And for instance, the whistle being on the cab roof and then moving and whatever. But you have to go back through several thousand to see when it happened and to alter what you've written down already. So that's my excuse for not getting around to the videos yet.
I don't think we'll hold it against you there. No, so once again, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you've all enjoyed it. It's certainly been interesting. We've all learned something tonight, and it's been quite nice, as Dave says, because it's been a bit more interactive. We are going to keep trying to develop it a little bit more, and Peter's got aspirations of a big screen in the museum, so we will see how that works next time. And we're not quite sure what we're going to do next, but as Dave says, there is a target who's going to be encouraged to do the next part of this talk, which may not be straight away, which will look at what was built here after the new company took over. But as ever, thank you all for watching. Please do stay safe out there, and we'll hopefully see you all soon at Ravenglass. So
Thank you for the excellent
Thank you.
presentation.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.